Hello, everyone, and welcome to our September webinar. I'm Denise, and with me is QAD and MRP expert, Don Lindsey. And today we also have Nancy McCrimmon, who will join us for the Q&A, bringing her experience as an SSM super user. We also have other members of the team with us today, so hopefully we'll have a nice lively Q&A session. Very quickly, before we get going here, please know that everyone connects to the webinar already muted, but you can type in questions or comments at any time. Enter them into the bottom of your control pane where you see hopefully you see, I have the big red arrow pointing. And then during the Q&A, we'll address the questions in the order they're received. Also, a very brief survey will pop up automatically as you exit the session. It really takes no time at all to answer the 3 questions. And feedback is quite helpful to us, of course. Finally, as soon as the replay of today's session is available, each of you will receive our Encore email. It will include a link to the replay, all of today's questions and answers. Also, the replay page will provide you with the links to our prior 2 webinars that covered other aspects of SSM. And now, let's learn from QAD and MRP guru and instructor extraordinaire, Don Lindsey. So Don, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Denise, for that glowing introduction. Well, here we are in the middle of September 2020, and we still find ourselves in the middle of a whole bunch of stuff going on in the world. Hurricanes, wildfires, pandemics, wow. We have to apologize for having to cancel our July 22nd webinar on purchasing, but I got the COVID. And it's taken me almost 6 weeks to recover from that process. But I think I'm in pretty good shape now. An interesting experience. We'll rebroadcast the 3rd part of our purchasing series webinar on Wednesday, October 21st. So we hope you'll join us then. We have many things to think about these days of COVID and 2020 election. So we appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day to be with us to talk a little bit more about the service and support module. The service and support module helps us track those things that we are required to keep track of, either for our customer, by the government, after they ship out of our facility. So on Wednesday, the 22nd of April, we kind of talked about the background of service and support, set up bombs and routers, install base, calls pending, depot orders, engineering. Then in May, we talked about warranties, contract coverage, and material orders. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about price lists, some discussion about return material authorizations. We'll talk about the RTS functionality, return to supplier. Cover just a little bit about service requests, talk about the old service and repair order functionality, and just a word about some SSM utilities. So I'm not gonna cover inquiries and reports. I'm gonna make the assumption that if you can get the data in, there's lots of ways to get the data out in reports, views, browses, cyber query, however you do your reporting. The reports are available, and I won't cover too much on the financial side of SSM functioning. We'll cover those in later webinars. Lots of resources. As I've said, service and support is new to a lot of operation people. Operation people are used to purchase orders and work orders and inventory. Well, with service and support, there's new things to learn: install base, contracts, warranties, material orders, etc. So I would recommend primarily the service and support training guide and the service and support user guide. Knowledge base, discussion groups. You should always be familiar with your data definitions and file relationships. Online help always helps to understand a little bit better. The navigation is pretty standard. And you'll find service and support in the 11xxx menus. I checked just a day or two ago, and there are 333 menus in the service and support module, and lots of acronyms. So as we always say, if you've got any questions about any terms we use or things we talk about, please send us an email. We'll try and get back with you as to the exact definition of that. And we always recommend, and specifically in terms of service and support, solid work instructions. A work instruction for every menu. As you'll see, some of these menus in service and support are fairly complicated. And so it's a good idea to have a good, solid set of work instructions for your users and a company data dictionary or wiki to help define how you in your organization define and use these particular functions in service and support. I always like the process maps in service and support. Great tool for beginning to understand. If you can get to the point where you can manipulate the process maps, they're great for implementing and actually operating the functionality in service and support. So the process maps are a good tool. And remember, there's no such thing as a stupid question, especially when it comes to service and support. So let's talk beginning just a little bit about service pricing. There's service price, or there's pricing in QAD. Some of us are familiar with 110.1, the sales order pricing. We can use that for RMA issues. There's also 110.2, which is the purchase or supplier pricing. We can use that pricing for RMA credits and return to suppliers. And then there's the 11.17.1 pricing, which is specifically intended for the service and support module. There's basically two things that service pricing addresses: the contract coverage and call activity recording. Of those, there are three types of price lists. There's a price list for contract, which is a type C. We'll see how that works. There are repair prices, which are designated as R, and then there are just expense for the call activity recording, and that's an E. We also have three amount types, which are available to us: discount percentage, a D, M or markup percentage, and just P for straight price. Some of the issues that we need to consider when we implement the service pricing: should price lists be for individual items, or are we going to base our pricing on some sort of item grouping or service category or work code or whatever? So are we going to charge based on the kind of work? Is it repair work? Is it installation work, etc., etc.? And in service pricing, we'll see that you can have fixed price and exchange price when needed for car return of particular prices. And again, when should the prices be effective? I remember one of the big activities of the first part of January here is updating the price list in 1.10.1, 1.10.2, and item service, because you've got start dates and end dates, and you know the marketing people, they love to change their marketing strategies. So when should price lists be effective? So we set up price lists in 11.17.1, service pricing maintenance. Service price list can be any nomenclature that you want: SSM1, SSM2, by part number, however you want it, and then the particular currency that you've got available. So we set up pricing. First of all, we can set up by item or by product line. So you can choose to do by product line if you've got your product line set up appropriately. The price list type is, as we mentioned, C or R or expense. And then we've got our account type: D, discount, M, markup, P, price. So we use repair pricing for car, items, labor, and expense. If we want item pricing in car, we're going to set up service groups, product lines, or items as we saw, and then optionally we can use work codes with any one of the three amount types. With labor and expense, that's going to be based on a service category and an item sort code. So with repair labor pricing, you can define it by a particular work code. We talked about work codes in April when we talked about the setup. That is going to be a type R code. We've got service categories that can be set up, and then the only issue with repair pricing, it can't be a discount price. With expense, you again can set it up by work code. You're going to have an E type for expense type price lists, and service categories again can be defined. And here we must have a count or amount type of P for the expense prices. As far as fixed pricing is concerned, work codes define the particular call line is charged as a fixed price. So you need to set up your fixed price charge code and the invoice sort code, like we talked about in April. And then the automated pricing is supported by the R type, and there is a fixed unit of measure in the 11.124 call management. Fixed pricing in some cases can actually be used as an alternate to contracts and warranties if that's a more simple approach to the items that you have out in the field. Here's a repair item. There's set it up by item, by service code or service group. Here we have the repair item, and there again we can use any one of the account types. The special units of measure in 11.124 are fixed price unit of measure and the exchange unit of measure. So you've got that option to set that up, and then with the service pricing, we can have that exchange price active for parts that are credited back into inventory for returned items from car. We talked about contract maintenance in May, and there's an 11.5.7 contract additional charges. Here, some organizations use this 11.5.7 as an alternate that allows them to add prices to contracts or create a discount on the particular contract. And so you can use the service type and then set your amount at F or P for percentage on the 11.5.7. So service pricing is very functional, allows you to set up service pricing for just about any way that you want to do it. So now we'll talk a little bit about return material authorizations. Material that is returned from the field is defined in your 11.7.1 returned material menu. There you've got maintenance. We'll talk about maintenance. You can have confirmations, receipts and shipments, and then I'll talk a little bit about this releasing RMA receipts to rework orders in case you have to rework parts that come back in from the field. So the process for the use of RMAs in business is to return wrong or broken items, issue replacements for those components. You can generally just return items to the facility. Optionally, you can update the install base either on shipments or receipts of RMAs, and then you can generate both credit and debit amounts for your RMA processing. If you have an activity that requires the intervention of an engineer, you probably recommended to use the call activity reporting, CAR, that we talked about on April 26th, and not RMAs, because RMAs, in fact, return inventory into your facility, whereas CAR, the parts remain the property of the customer in the install base. Some issues with RMA implementations: how are you going to forecast repair parts and replacement parts? Especially if you have inventory that is shared with production, how are you going to deal with the allocations for those materials? How are you going to allocate to RMAs versus production work orders or production orders. That has to be addressed. How are you going to use transaction history? There's a whole bunch of transactions that are generated through the RMA process. The RMAs themselves are basically old or another kind of sales order. So you've got issues, receipts, transfers, all of that has to be defined. And then especially, how are you going to update the install base based on your returns and your shipments of the RMAs? So there's basically three things you do: receive parts, issue parts, and create invoices. If you use CAR, remember, you generate RMAs independently of call tracking. You don't need to have the intervention of a service engineer, and in fact, as I mentioned, RMAs are returned to your inventory, whereas calls remain customer property. So how do you process an RMA? Fairly simple. You can take a call. Obviously, if a customer calls up and says, "I want to return this process," you could take a call for that and enter it into. That's optional. Or you can create an RMA itself in 11.7.1.1, which we'll look at. Now, within that 11.7.1.1, you can both do the shipment process in that menu, and you can do the receipt process within that menu. A lot of organizations just have a very quick turnaround on RMAs, and they want to do that. Then you can print RMAs. If you've got to have a document internally, or you want to send a document back out to the customer, you can print it at 11.7.1.3. You can then create a packing list. And as I mentioned, if you used 11.7.1 to do the RMA shipment and receipt, if you don't want to do that, if you want to create the RMA and then do the shipment and receipt separately, let's say you've got the receiving guy back in the receiving dock, he may use the 11.7.1.13, and then you send the part over to be shipped in the shipping department, and they'll use the 11.7.1.16. So you can separate that out. Then you can do that release to work order, the 11.7.1.5 that I mentioned. As you receive the part, it may need to be reworked, may need to be fixed for the particular customer. Then that may link the RMA to an RTS, because I work for several companies who have instruments, let's say, that are done by subcontractors, and you want to send the part back to the subcontractor. You can use an RTS for that. And then you link the RMA so that when it returned from the supplier, you can ship that same unit back out to the customer that returned it. And then you generate the RMA invoice, and that's basically done through the sales order module, because again, I mentioned that a return material authorization is basically a sales order with two special kinds of lines. The RMA control file, I would always recommend you keep booking history. That's probably a given. We'll look at that display service contract functionality. That's kind of neat. Detail allocations, you may want to do detail allocations when you do your 11.7.1.1. And then there's these two sections of customer locations, spares locations, product at suppliers, supplier sites, and return from suppliers. We'll talk a little bit about that in terms of 11 or 1.1.18. Here is where you're going to set up those customer and supplier locations for RMAs and RTSs. So you're going to need a default location for each one of the RMA receipt, RTA ship to, RMA issue, and RTS return to. There is a section in 11.7.24, the accounting, or what is now 36.9.10 SSM accounting control, for warranty types. You can define default warranty types for your RMAs. You can have a billing and billing service type standard. Again, we mentioned those in terms of the contracts we talked about on May 20th. And then if, in fact, you have giveaways, there is this giveaway process that you can charge for. You can't use the S or the W, the contract or the warranty, for either billing or giveaway in that particular sense. Customer credit status works pretty much the same that it does in 711. You set this up in 1124, the Service Management Control File. If you have an option 0, that means that you can create RMAs regardless of the customer status. It might be a little bit questionable. 1 says you get a warning displayed, and the action status of hold is placed upon the RMA. Or if you really want tight controls, you can set this credit option at 2, and therefore you can't even create RMAs for customers who are on credit hold. So that works pretty much like the sales order. In addition, the RMA control files, the 1124, share a whole lot of fields and functionality with not only 7.1.24, but other control files within the system. Allocations, promise dates, price tables, minimum ship, consume forecast. So you need to consider the effect of the control file settings in 7.1.24 and how they're going to affect the RMA process, the RTS process in that 1124 control for it. So there's a lot of cross-fertilization there. RMA service types, the RMA gets its service type, which controls credit pricing and coverage levels, as we saw in May, either from the call itself, if you create a call for the RMA, from a contract, if that is associated with the RMA, or it is defaulted from the 11.7.24 control file. So when you set up an RMA, you either use a warranty or a service type, and then that, as in most things, defaults from the RMA header to each individual line on the RMA, and then you can modify it if that is necessary. So here we have the 11.7.1.1 RMA Maintenance Screen. This is the primary menu that you use to input and process RMAs. As they say, this is probably one of the more complex menus. I went in last week, and there are 34 frames and 171 fields in the RMA maintenance screen. So the navigation of RMAs takes a little bit of practice, but you're going to get your RMA number from the control file. And then if you have entered a call in the system for this return of product, if you put in the call ID, the information in the call header is going to default to the RMA header. That's sometimes very handy to have, but you can do that, or you can leave the call blank. We looked at that little setting in the 11.7.24 display service contract. This is, I always recommend that you do this because this allows in the RMA maintenance the pop-up of a little screen that allows you to show what the service contracts are associated with this particular end user. And so you've got immediate visibility of what that functionality is in terms of the RMA that you're entering. Then you enter the RMA detail frame, 19 fields in the RMA, orders, so order date, expected purchase order, marks, day books, channels, all that kind of information. So you enter your relevant information in 11.7.1.1 detail header frame. Then there's a sales order freight frame that appears. Here you can assign a salesperson, you can set commissions, you can use freight functionality. I don't think there's a whole lot of companies out there that use the freight functionality, but it is available as it is in sales orders in the RMA maintenance process. Then there's an additional RMA detail frame, and here is where you set up your default sites, or the default sites are going to feed into your RMA from the control file for your issue sites and your receipt sites. And then if you have defined calls or contracts on the RMA, those will also appear in this additional detail frame. Then there's the install base frame, which allows you to update the install base, end user, ownership, warranty codes, etc. You can update those. Then it's going to take you to receipt lines. And as I mentioned, the RMA is a sales order with two separate kind of lines. The first being the RMA receipt line, because the assumption is that you're going to receive the part from the customer. And so you've got the item, the unit price list, if appropriate, where you're going to receive it. You've got quantity fields, you've got date fields. You can do detail allocations on your RMA receipts. And then there pops up a receipt line detail frame. And there you've got 16 fields, quantity receipt. If you're going to do the receipt within the 11711, you would fill that frame out. And then you'd also use this processing code for that. Some additional reference fields. If you do in fact use that 11711 pending field, you can use a W in that pending field as release to work order. You can keep it as pending for further process if you do the 11713 RMA receipt as a separate function back in the receiving department, or you can release it directly to an RTS. So the 11715 is kind of handy. It does the actual creation of a rework order. It uses the RMA number dot the line of the particular line that you're processing. So it will create a order, a work order for that. You can see the RMA dot line. It is an hour type, so that means that the part number of the rework order is the component required to be issued into the rework order, and then it sets it at an R status release. So you can go in and then you can use that 1613.1, your work order bill maintenance, to adjust the quantity required, quantity allocated, quantity issued, et cetera, and you can see that the work order parent item is the child requirement and is issued from that RMA default location. So that's kind of a handy process, automation of the process to get that RMA receipt into the rework order. Then you can define your work order routing for the repair in 1613.13. If you use the 1137 default routing, that will populate into the rework order, or you can actually use the 1613.13 to set up your work order sequences. Then you simply do your work order receipt, and the work order receipt puts the item of the RMA back into inventory. I always recommend that you use the 1634. Great report to look at the cost of a rework order, the current status, the change, the value. I usually like to have the planners review that on a weekly basis just to keep track of the costs associated with the rework and warranties. So RMA issue lines, if you don't do 1171 RMA issue in the RMA maintenance screen, then you can do that with detail allocations so that you can actually tell the system what parts you're going to ship back. This is the RMA issue list details that we looked at. And then if you use this receipt field in the issue line detail, if you set that to yes, then the RMA is going to use the default of the RMA receipt line to the RMA issue line. And this is basically to assist in that one-to-one part replacement, because you may have a very expensive instrument that you get back from a customer and you want to ship that same product back to the same customer. So you can update the issue, and then we've got the RMA trailer, which is basically the same as RMA sales order. The RMA receipts, if you don't use 11711, then the guys back in receiving can use the 11713 to do the same reshipment. And the RMA shipment, if you're going to have the shipping department, they'll use the 11716 to ship it back, print their sales order, and generate. There's an RMA confirmation. Just like the sales order confirmation, you can control your backlog this way. You can put in the RMA, and then you control how that affects the backlog and back orders in the system. Invoices, if you've referenced a call on the RMA, the call comments will appear on the invoice. Call number will appear on the invoice, and if you use a service contract, it's going to print on the RMA invoice beneath each one of the invoice lines. So that's kind of handy. So RMAs, get the part back, send it to the customer. RTSs is when you have a part in inventory and you want to send it back to a supplier, have them fix it, and then have the supplier send it back to you in your facility. So you can specify whether the supplier ships the repaired item back to your repair site, or you can actually have the supplier ship the part back to the customer if that might be appropriate. So again, as with RMAs, there's two ways to do RMAs, 11711 or 11716 and 13. Same with the RTS. You can do the standard purchase order processing 11731 RTS maintenance, or you can use separate functions 1173116 or 1173113. There's the menu. You return parts to the supplier, track the materials at the supplier or not. I'll show you how to do that. And then the shipment of the part back to you at your facility. So there's your control file settings where you define those at supplier location and site. And when you receive the part back from the supplier, that's the default for both the site and the location for the part coming back. So the RTS records this activity in 11731. There's the header. As the RMA has two special types of lines, the RTS has two special types of lines. The first is items returned to the supplier. So here you can denote the serial number and where it's coming from and expected dates, etc. That's the item 2. This field, the inventory issue field, plays in how you're going to transfer that information back. If you set no to inventory issue no, then the parts are going to be transferred to the at supplier site and location. If you say yes, they're just going to be issued out of your inventory and you no longer have visibility in your inventory. And so if you use that invoice issue, again, if you set no, then you're going to get the transfer data. If you say yes, then it's simply going to issue it and you're going to do a PO receipt for that process. You can also use the 1173116 for that RMA shipment process. If you'd like, this is going to take the inventory and transfer it to the at site supplier and at supplier location. The second kind of receipt line or line for RTS is items received from the supplier. So you've got items shipped to the supplier, you've got items received from the supplier. So there again, you're going to put in the material that's going to be returned to you after repair, or if you don't use the 11731 11.7.3.1, you can use the 11.7.3.13. So again, the guys back in the receiving dock can use that menu to just do the receipt process. With the receipt process, if you use Supplier Performance, which we'll talk about a little bit more in October, you can have the system update the Supplier Performance for that. And if you check your container and shipping control, yes, you can put in a optional shipper number and an inventory movement code if that assists in your business process. So RMAs, bring the part back from the customer into your inventory, put it back in the inventory or rework it, ship it back to that same customer or ship the customer another product. Then once the part gets into inventory, you can ship it back on RTS to a supplier. They fix it, and then you can receive that back into your inventory and then either ship it back to the same customer that returned it on your RMA, or you could just put it back in the inventory. So the service request in 11.1.15 is a little bit simpler process. The service request represents an open problem or a service project. Maybe you're going to update all of the instruments fields with a new resistor, or maybe you're going to republish the operating manuals for a particular instrument. So you can use service requests to track this and the progress and dispatch various information for that service request. So in 11.1.15, you've got a service request, status codes, queue and a queue manager, and then your control files. Control files, pretty simple. You set your open status and your closed status and define when the service request number starts for that process. You can create service codes in 11.7.15.7 or 11.1.15.7, service code maintenance. So in addition to your open and close, you may have pending, you may have in process, you may have on hold, lots of different options for your status code. Then this is the 11.1.15.1 service request. You can link a call just like you can for RMAs. The type, the problem, those are just generalized codes. You've got some reference fields as target fixed date, comments, etc. You can denote the queue that this particular service request is in, and the severity, again, defined by generalized codes. There's a lot of stuff that you can input for that. You can also have lots and lots of comments, submitter comments, engineering comments. You can use master comments for that or transactional comments, depending on how you want to do that. Then you've got your 11.1.15.13, the service queue manager. So you place a request in a queue, and then you can use the service request manager to modify the priority, the status, the engineer problem type, etc., etc. Then you can process that service request through the system. The old method of service is in the 7.23. This is a real, and I emphasize real simple way to do service requests in QAD. For most organizations, it says probably use the 11.7.1.15 or the 11.7.1.1 RMA 11.7.3.1, the return to supplier, your contracts, warranties, all the rest of the functionality in service and support. Because with the 7.23, the old service repair order, there is no integration between anything. It just kind of sits out there as a standalone functionality. There's no inventory planning, no invoicing, and the service repair orders have basically no financial effect. So you create your service request in 7.23.1. You can put in header information. You can define fault codes and repair codes. You can use Comments, there's 52 lines of comments for master comments that you can use. So it's not bad. I've seen companies that use this sales and repair order maintenance to do that. In general, it just means you enter it, you print it, you update it, and then at some place you close and delete it. So it has no financial impact, has no real functionality as far as invoicing or anything of that nature. But I have seen organizations use this old 7.23 functionality. As far as the service and support utilities are concerned, there's a whole bunch of services support utilities, 25 or 30 of these things. And if you want to insert your own custom programs, you can do that. If you use engineering scheduling, you can do that. I've used the invoice history delete. I have used this expense cost discrepancy report. I've often used the back out incorrect allocation functionality. That's kind of nice. And then there's some reports down here: engineering utilization browse, all call browse, RTS performance. So you should probably take a look at the 1125, see what you can use, and kind of test out those processes. So as a summary, 32Soft has some loaders that will assist you, because as you see from our discussions April, May, and today, there's a whole lot of information, 333 menus, lots and lots of information needs to get into the service and support module. And if you want to run through all those maintenance screens, we do have an install-based maintenance update. We do have a service pricing loader, and we just recently developed a material order maintenance. In addition, we have the customer work center functionality, the CWC, and there we've incorporated some of the call maintenance, call activity recording, tracking, and creation of material orders in relationship to this customer work center process that we've got. So there's a little bit about service price list function. You can set up just about any way you want to assist with returns, shipments, functionality from service price. RMA, probably one of the most complex menus in the system. Lots of functionality there that brings parts back into inventory and removes them from the install base. The RTS allows you to return parts to supplier, them fix it and send it back to you. You can use service requests, or you can even use the old service and repair order functionality to just kind of keep track of things that are going on with that service functionality. And then lots and lots of service and support utilities that are available to you. So, Denise, that kind of wrap it up for this morning. I'll go ahead and turn it back to you, and we'll see if there's any questions.
Excellent, as always, Don. Thank you so much. Before moving on to the Q&A, real quick, I just wanted to remind those who may or may not know that despite our team's broad and deep working knowledge of the module, 32Soft does not implement SSM. But even though, or maybe because we don't implement, we can be completely objective about your use of the module. So if you need help deciding whether to use SSM, or if you're unsure whether you're optimizing its use, we can help with those things. So for now, I will go ahead and move on to be conscientious of everyone's time. I imagine everyone knows about next week's first ever, perhaps inaugural, virtual conference, as it includes all US user groups, and registration is free for all members and QAD customers. And yes, we will be there. Don will be presenting on day 2, Tuesday the 29th at noon. Plus, we are a sponsor again and have a booth loaded with information. And oh, yes, I have a sneak peek of our booth where we'll be available for live chats. And we're really, here's Don's presentation information, and we are also really excited about our Ask Me Anything sessions, which if you just scroll down a little, we'll provide the details for those. We do have 3 scheduled, and they're only 20-minute sessions, and they're scheduled between events, so you will not miss anything. Great. And for anybody on the fence, it's not too late to register. If you do attend, certainly please visit us. We have, oh, here we are, more giveaways than usual for this event. So that's it for the virtual conference. And as far as upcoming webinars, we have QAD Purchasing, New Ideas and Practical Tips on October 21st. And that is followed by Supply Chain Changes and Challenges on November 18th. And talking about webinars does bring us full circle. So we can, let me just do a real quick check for questions. And we do not have any, so we can go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. I think we all understand the extraordinary value of existing customers, but did you know that customer experience, speed, convenience, helpful employees, friendly service is what matters most to about 70% of them? Not products, not price. So optimizing use of one of the most valuable and robust aspects of QAD ERP, meaning the service and support module, to manage after-sales activities could provide you with a ton of opportunities to deliver. That is all I have for today, but Don, team, is there anything else anybody else wanted to say before we close out?
Just a word, being a COVID recoverer, please wear your mask.
Yes.
Don't infect anybody else. It's not a pleasant experience. Like I said, it took me 6 weeks to get over it, and it's dangerous. So be careful out there.
So yes. Happy you're back and well, Don.
No more than I and my wife. Yeah, so please wear your mask and be careful. The COVID is still with us, and as Dr. Fauci says, it probably will be. So
for
stay safe.
Quite a while, yes. Keep safe and healthy, everybody, and thank you so much for your time today. Hopefully, we will see you next month, if I could speak better, at next month's webinar, but at the virtual conference first. So have a super day, and again, keep safe and healthy. Thanks for coming.